Hello and welcome to the next video in our vMix tutorial series. Today we're going to be talking about vMix call. vMix call is what you will be using primarily to get video and audio feeds from your remote contributors. Now, brief overview of what vMix call is. vMix call is a video conferencing platform. vMix developed a WebRTC platform, and WebRTC is the same protocol that most other video conferencing apps use. Google Meet, Zoom, Teams, they all use WebRTC, but vMix does it a little bit differently, and the integration into the overall vMix platform allows for a lot greater flexibility and control and better quality than Zoom and the rest. So first off, I said that it uses the WebRTC protocol. vMix will try to establish a peer-to-peer connection between you and your remote guest. So there's a login page, there's a website that the caller goes to. Once they log in, so there's a web page that the caller will go to, and once they log in, vMix will use its own internal servers to try to make a peer-to-peer connection. If it's successful, that's it. You're directly connected to your remote caller. If it can't make a peer-to-peer connection, more on that later on why, but if it can't make a peer-to-peer connection, it will use a relay server in between you guys. So the caller will connect to that server, and then their video and audio will get relayed to you and vice versa. You get a better quality most of the time from a peer-to-peer connection, although I've had instances where I have had to use the relay server and it worked just fine. It kind of depends on the day. Since it's a server that's hosted by vMix, if there's a lot of traffic or the distance from the caller and you to the server, that can affect the quality. But for the most part, what you just generally see is just increased latency if you have to use that relay server. So what's great about vMix call is that you get an individual return feed to each caller, and you get an individual audio and video feed from each caller. So it does increase your bandwidth requirements because you require, you have 2 streams per caller, the one you're getting from them and then your return feed to them. So if you're using this, you just have to make sure you calculate your bandwidth adequately. Most of the time you're going to be getting around, ideally you'd get a 2 megabit connection from each caller, and then I usually just send a 720 resolution return feed at 800 kilobits a second for my return feed. So the bandwidth requirements, it does increase your bandwidth requirements, but it's not killer. I've had a full 16 callers dialed in using 2 machines and streaming out to a couple different sites, and I was fine on a 35 megabit upload connection. So like I said, vMix call allows for the potential for greater quality than Zoom. I say potential because it's all dependent on your caller's bandwidth, and that's kind of the biggest downside to the whole entire pandemic and virtual events in general. But that is the biggest downside to vMix call, is that it is highly dependent on your remote caller's internet upload connection. There are things you can do, and I'll go over this later in this video, to mitigate a poor connection from your caller. But at the end of the day, if they have a bad connection, it's not going to be the greatest experience. But with vMix call, you can get it's possible to get a 1080p feed at max of 4 megabit bitrate from your caller. So the potential is there. Now, I will say if they're using Google Chrome or most any other Firefox or Safari or whatnot, those browsers limit WebRTC to 720. So even if they have a 1080p camera and they're going through Google Chrome for this, like, you're going to get a 720 feed from them, and that's fine. No one's going to know the difference, and nobody has to know. Next, we are going to look at the caller login process and just the user interface for the user side of vMix Call. vMix Call is web-based, so all they have to do is go to a website. You can generate a link and send that out, and it'll send them to this page. There's a couple different ways of generating the links, and there's another version of vMix Call that's an advanced version that's what they call it, advanced. But basically what it is, it's an updated user interface, and it makes it a little bit easier to select your camera and your microphone. But for the purposes of this video, we're just going to use regular vMix Call and the normal, quote-unquote normal way of generating links. So once that link is generated, they'll click on it and they go to this page here. The password is already pre-filled using the link, so all they have to do is type in their name and click join. So before I click join, you'll notice I'm using Chrome here. Actually, you won't. You don't see it in the screen capture. I'm using Chrome here. You can use Safari. You can use Firefox. You can use the new Microsoft Edge that's based on Chromium. And if you're on a phone, you can dial in on a phone. You can use Safari from iOS, or if you're on Android, you can use Chrome. I tell everyone Chrome is preferred. It works just fine in Firefox. I've used it in Edge. It works just fine. But Chrome is the easiest to, Chrome, most people know Chrome, and I found it's a little bit easier to explain all the settings and all that stuff using Chrome. So anyway, we're going to click join right now. Now, when I click join, there's going to be a blue screen. That blue screen is representative of the server trying to make that peer-to-peer connection. It's going to go pretty quickly for me, but for other people, they might get hung up on this blue screen. If they get hung up on this blue screen, most of the time they just have to wait. So it might take 5-10 seconds. I've seen the blue screen for a minute, not a literal minute, but for a little bit. If they don't get past the blue screen, that means that they're being blocked by their firewall, and they can't make a connection at all. So what happens is, there's that blue screen, and if it can't make the peer-to-peer connection, then it'll use that server connection, that relay server connection. If they don't get past the blue screen at all, they're just not coming through to you at all. So I'm going to click on join call. There's our blue screen, and boom, we're connected. So this is, I dressed up for you guys, can you tell? This is the green room. In our other videos, we know that they enter the green room, and where they will be greeted by the other people on the call, which you can see all of our lovely callers, and one of these will be our ASM. They will be able to hear you if everything, all the audio and everything will be routed correctly. But it's just a multi-view. That's our quote-unquote green room. Sometimes we have a more designed green room, which is just a custom input. But over here, you can see this little floating window that's highlighted in red. A lot of times people will connect. They'll see this box here for them. They'll see them down here. They might see them in preview or in output, and they'll be like, I see myself everywhere, and they get confused. First thing you're going to want to have them do is let's just have them turn off this self view here. A lot of times my deck manager or ASM will be the person who facilitates all of this and explains it, but you might be the person who does it. There's just the standard controls down here. This is the end call. You click on this, they leave. This is the mute your camera, the mute your audio. This one right here will turn off the self view. This one makes it full screen. We don't really want to use that one. And there's also the chat here, so they can see the chat. So once they turn off their self view, they'll be able to see a little bit more clearly. One thing to note that always comes up is there's a delay. Everyone complains about the delay. So what you'll be able to see it from here. In this self view up here, this is real time. There's no latency on it because it's just a view of your camera. This down here, this whole screen right here is the return feed from the studio. So it's going over the internet. So since it goes over the internet, there's naturally latency. So you can see, you can just see it right now. It's not that bad for me right now because I'm just connected on my local network and I'm very close to myself. So the latency is pretty low. But if you're connecting to people in other countries or across the country, that latency could be greater. So the reason for the latency, like Zoom's not like that. It's like, yeah, Zoom is like that. But what Zoom does is, when you have the gallery view up in Zoom, your camera, they just put this over, this is basically what they just do. They put your real-time camera down here. So you don't notice the latency, and nobody else notices the latency because they don't see what to compare it to. But that is one thing that's different coming into vMix call. And sometimes depending on the connection, a typical latency, a good latency, like a great connection, is under 100 milliseconds in latency, and that's what Zoom will have, is typically close to 100 or under 100 milliseconds. vMix, if you have a great connection on peer-to-peer, it'll be under 100. Typical latency I see is around 200 to 300 milliseconds, which is still not that noticeable. Bad connections I've seen up to 500 milliseconds. So what that means is that return feed that they're seeing right down here, the seeing right down here, it could be a full second between what's happening in real time for them and then them seeing it in their return feed. There's potential for that because the video has to go from here to you and then back to them. So if it's 500 milliseconds each way, you're at a full second right there. That's an extreme case. Rarely does it get that high, knock on wood, but it does. So that is something that you will potentially have to work through with your presenters, is if they get hung up on this latency thing. Some people are fine. You tell them this is how it is, and they're like, oh, okay. And some people freak out about it because they have a panel discussion, and you can just tell them, every time we've done this, we've done a lot of panel discussions. The latency is not an issue. Just tell them when they're in this view here, or if they're in a panel and they're going to see themselves on screen, just try not to focus on your camera view, but focus on speaking into the camera. That should be the ASM doing that anyway, but you might have to offer that reassurance. Next up here, we have the vMix call manager interface. So I'm going to show you what it looks like on your end when someone connects. So your template files will already have all of these call inputs here. But to get to the call manager, you right click on a vMix input, on a vMix call input, and then click on open call manager. If you're building a show from scratch, or you need to add another caller, you just click on add input and then video call down here. And then you would click OK. I'm not going to do it now because I already have 8 callers in here. My name persisted here because vMix will just keep that name there if someone disconnects. I'll type in a different name and we'll see what happens there. So I'm just going to open the call manager. I'll right click on the input, click on open call manager, and this is all of the calls that I have loaded into vMix. There's 8 here, so you can see you'll have to use your second monitor for this if you want to monitor. I usually have this open the entire time, so I can monitor people's feeds. So let me just join from the other end here. I'll join as Mark this time, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so you can see down here that the name changed to Mark. The name up here was Mark because that's what I typed in. And you can see here, Mark logged in. This means that Mark is on the blue screen. Like these right here, Mark logged in, caller has made initial contact. It might get hung up here for a little bit. Like this is them on the blue screen. And then once they're connected, sending the reply to initiate call. And then once the call is connected here, once it's green, that means you got them. So sometimes if they're stuck on this blue screen here, it'll say Mark logged in, but it'll show up red, and because he's still in this blue screen here. So if you're doing your initial tech checks and you don't get past this, that pretty much always means that they got hung up by a firewall, really is what that is. That's the leading cause of not being able to connect. That, or they're trying to do it on Chrome from an iPhone or something like that. But most of the time, it's a firewall issue. So up here, you'll see connection health stats. When it's green, that means all is fine and dandy in this world. This is the resolution. This is the bit rate that you're getting, the frames per second that you're getting, and your latency, video latency. And then down here is the audio, your audio resolution, bit rate, and latency. So you'll notice here that I'm around 250, 230, under 300 milliseconds. I'm using Wi-Fi on this laptop here, so that's pretty good. Generally, always want to use a hard line, Ethernet cable. That rarely happens with some presenters, but that is highly recommended. With Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi is so weird. They could turn on their microwave and it could interfere with their internet signal. You can see some more in-depth stats by clicking on this little button right up here. The main thing I use this page for is looking at this right down here. If they are using a peer-to-peer connection, like if they were able to make a successful peer-to-peer connection here, this will say, it'll give the IP address, their external IP address, the port number it's using, and whether you're the host or it'll say something else here too. The main thing I'm looking at is if it says relayed or not. If it says relayed, that means you're connected to that relay server. Anything else, I think it'll say host or server reflexive. Either one of those means that you have a peer-to-peer connection. If it says relayed, that means you are on that relay server. So that's just good to know. That's one way to confirm that people's firewall ports were opened and whatnot. So you can see here that I'm getting pretty good bit rate. It actually went up. I don't even know if I'm on the right Wi-Fi network here. Oh, no, I am. Okay. All right, so I'm going to close the call manager and then go through some of these right-click settings here. So disconnect will manually disconnect the call. Your video source is you can manually select what output they're seeing from you, as well as what audio bus they're getting. Remote video bandwidth to the guest. This is your return feed to them. So what is the quality feed that you are sending to them? This is not, I think it's supposed to be individual per caller, like this setting. But I don't know if it's a bug or not, but if you select it for one, it applies it to all the different calls most of the time. So let me put it on default here, 1200. You can see here, hers is 1200, hers is 1200. I'm going to move you to 720, and then we go back here and it changed me back to 720. I've had instances where it was different, where I've had it individual per caller. I couldn't replicate it. I don't know what that is. So I keep everyone on 720 and on 800 kilobits a second. It preserves bandwidth, because whatever you're doing, it's this time times 8 is your upload. And then down here, advanced settings. There's this box right here, which is allow only direct peer-to-peer connections. So this means that it won't allow you to use that relay server. I generally keep that unchecked. We want to have that as a fallback if we need to. And then remote video guest bandwidth. So auto should be fine for the most part. Here, let me open up the call manager here, and we can show you what that button does. You can manually set it. So I leave it on auto, and the WebRTC protocol will decide what the best bandwidth is to use. Sometimes if their connection is poor, or they're saying, I have a, I just did a speed test and I have a 30 megabit upload, and you're only getting a low bit rate from them. Sometimes you just need to select a manual bit rate. So let me dumb down this signal here. Like say their internet connection's bad, and we just want to we'll bring it all the way down to 300 kilobits. You can see here it's throttling that connection down, and the resolution is based off of the bit rate. The resolution that you get from them is automatically determined by vMix call, and it's based on the bit rate here. That's a WebRTC thing. So if I boost this back up, let's say, okay, we're going to try you, at the default here at 1200. It might take a minute for it to ramp up, so let's watch it. When you make connections with people, give it a couple minutes. Sometimes it takes like a full 2 to 3 minutes before their connection stabilizes. So before you start to troubleshoot, just keep them on the line, and you can see right now it already started to go up. But for some people, especially if you have a higher latency, it could just take a minute for it to stabilize. So before you go through any troubleshooting steps, just give it a minute. Okay, so one other thing I want to show you is this. This right down here is the chat box as well. So if I type in a message, let me make sure I have the right keyboard. You can see it shows up as the host here. And then if we go back to our user, our caller, if we open up the chat, you can see that there's the chat. Then going back, and there it is. So this chat, they do have to open it manually. That's one thing that your ASM or deck manager should talk them through. But I've had some shows where we kind of ignore this text chat, some where we utilize it. So it's just kind of a show by show thing. All right, let's go back to our call manager, and I want to show you how to grab these links. So when you first open vMix and you first launch the call manager, you're going to have to scroll. See, this is the chat history, connection history, all of here. To find the link for this call, just scroll all the way up to the top. And you'll see here, you'll see this is the call number. And it says this input is ready to accept calls. And then it gives you the short link. This is the link that you're sending out to people. This link right here. This is the link that pre-populates the password field. So if you need to see, you can click on the names up here. Sometimes these names get all, you can see, you can cycle through display types. But if you keep the call number up there, you can see, okay, ending in 196. Here's the link. This would be the link for the call ending in 196. And then again, down here, this is the link for the call ending in 282, and so on and so forth. So when I make a show, I first thing grab all of these links and put them in a spreadsheet. It's a little tedious, but it's fine. You can reuse links. I like to swap out these links like every 2 to 3 shows. Sometimes it's never happened to me, but I have heard of other vMix ops where this link is, they use the same link for like 10 shows, and then someone from a previous show tries to log in and boot someone. So it's good every once in a while just to refresh these links. All right, so basic show operation with vMix callers. If you're doing a tech check, which preferably we always have a tech check with somebody, when you're doing your tech check, you make sure you have the right link. Confirm that link before you send it out. Dial into it yourself, make sure it works, and then you're sitting on this page waiting for that caller to come in. You want to make sure that the first thing they see is going to be the green room, which, as you know, per our routing sheet and just kind of standard, our SOP is output 2 is the green room, which is the multi-view, and then their bus B is our green room audio. So all of these callers, so this is the video source that they're getting and the audio source that they're getting. So that's the one thing you want to make sure. And then the other thing is in the audio mixer, you just per our audio routing sheet, when they're in the green room, they're going to bus B and C and D. And when they go live, they're going to the master bus here. And then that we have our caller control panel. We already went over that on our Stream Deck. So when I press call Mark live, it sends Mark to the master audio bus and turns off bus B, C, and D. And when I go back, it brings them back. So that's the audio side of it. And then from the caller side, what they see when you push that button here is I'm going to send them live. This is our output that we have dedicated for their live view, quote unquote, which is specialized panel return. And then you can see here that the video source that they're seeing switched to output 3. If I bring them back, you can see it switched to output 2. And then the audio source, what they are hearing on their end is the master bus. And then when they go back, they're hearing B. I think I've mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating, is vMix call will auto mix minus everybody in this one instance. So if you have all 8 callers all on this one machine and your backup machine you're not using that for any callers, you don't have to worry about the mix minus. Like once you send if you have 5 people here all in a panel, you don't have to worry about mix minuses for them. It'll automatically do that. So you want to make sure that each caller input will default to the green room. And you can also do that just on the Stream Deck, just by punching all the inputs to the green room. But I do a visual check as well, just to make sure. so nobody gets caught off guard. It says this experience is important for each caller, that what they see when they log in is what you've told them. Perfect. All right, and this last one, cool, we're good to go. So typically what we do and what I have been doing for the tech check and initial login process is we all log into a Zoom or a Teams call first, whatever the client is most familiar with. I'll get there with my producer, and I'll have all the links ready so I can drop them into the text chat. So via our show routing from our other videos, you know that call is hosted from the backup computer, the vMix 2. So on vMix 2, you'll want to dial in to the call. You want to check all your audio routing and make sure that you can hear the Zoom or Teams call and that they can hear you. What I normally do is I will also dial in from a call and just triple confirm that all the routing and everything is working right, that I can hear the backstage, that I could hear the Zoom call. So once we all join, the producer does their spiel, and then they will likely hand it off to you to explain the whole process of logging in, which is pretty much just what I showed you. And then you'll drop in the links for each person and send them off their merry way. Usually what I tell them, though, is I go through the whole spiel. So you'll see the landing page. When I drop in the link, all you have to do is type in your name and then click join call. But important, before I do that, I say, before you click on join call, you're going to want to leave this Zoom call that we're in right now. That part is very important, because if they don't, then you're going to get audio feedback, and it's going to be really confusing. So I really stress that multiple times, is once you have your link and you're on that landing page where it says, click join call, leave this Zoom call first. The reason why we join the Zoom call in the first place is if they have any problems connecting, if firewall ports weren't opened or something like that, and they couldn't connect, they have a fallback. So they can come back to the Zoom, and then you can troubleshoot from there. So once you have them connected and you see that they're here, you can monitor their connection. It'll go yellow like that often. That's usually nothing to worry about. If they have a poor connection, it'll happen a lot, and you'll see some stuttering and stuff. Don't share these stats with anybody. People get really hung up on numbers. If their connection's poor and they have like a 540, like 960 by 540 connection resolution with a 800 or a 500 kilobit connection, no, that's not great, but it's not worth bringing that up to anybody, because they'll just freak out about it. Unless their video is super choppy and inconsistent, and it is really poor. And it just kind of depends on your client and how much you'll be able to work with them on their connection. If you don't get any tech check with them and you see them 30 minutes before they're supposed to go on or less, and it's poor, I don't even bring it up. As long as they're here and they're connected and they can make it, and it doesn't cut out and it seems stable enough, great. But if you're able to work with them and have a hardwired connection and go through some troubleshooting steps in your tech checks, then I'll start to bring up, connection health and all that stuff. But if they look decent, try not to share these numbers with them. All right. So once they're connected, another big problem that they might have is the wrong camera gets selected or the wrong audio device gets selected. So get familiar in Chrome on how to select the right audio and video device. So vMix, the advanced vMix call makes it easy. There's a little settings cog here that they can select the device. But in regular Chrome, and in regular vMix call, it's a little bit trickier. If you're not getting a video feed from them and you can hear them, you're gonna want to have them go click on this guy right up here, this little camera, and it tells you which microphone and which camera you're using. So here it says here, I don't think that's the right microphone. Like, am I even getting, let me see if I'm getting an audio. And I'm not, yeah, that's right. I'm not even getting an audio signal for myself. So here we go. You can't change it from here. You can only see which device you're using from here. So so in order to change these settings, you're going to go to Manage and then click on Manage. It'll take you to a whole nother settings page. Then in the permissions, you're going to click on Camera, and then you can select which camera Chrome is using. So I'm just going to change this just so we can see it change. And then for microphone, we're going to change it to MacBook Pro microphone. So once they change it here, they're going to need to reload the page. So that's easy. They can just click reload. And, oh, look at that. It clicked my, I'm getting an audio signal now. You can see the meter. It didn't change my camera, I think, because the OBS camera is not even running right now. But if they have a different camera, like, let me see if it'll do the NDI video. Yeah, see, it's black up here. So now, yep. So if they have multiple cameras connected, then you're just going to have them select the right one. So we'll go back and we'll do camera and then FaceTime HD. Perfect. And then refresh the page. And there we go. So you might have to talk people through that. Hopefully you don't, but if they can't hear you, number one, make sure that all of your routing is correct, like they're hearing the right source and your microphone's turned on, all that stupid stuff. But if they can't hear you after all of that and you've confirmed on your end that they should, then they have to select the right speaker source. If you can't hear them, it's their microphone is the wrong microphone or they're muted. You can actually see on, I'll show you. You can see when each individual caller mutes themselves. So you can see microphone turned off. And then microphone turned back on. And then you can also see when they turn their camera off or on. So that's useful in, if someone their microphone's not working or whatnot, you can see, is it turned on? Great. So once you make those initial tech checks, from there, I usually walk the caller through what the process is like of going live. So usually we'll have a stage manager backstage who is prepping the caller. So ideally, you're not the one who's talking to these callers and saying you're about to go on. In some cases that you might, but if we have a lot of callers, I really push for having an ASM or a deck manager from the client. So, we'll say, okay, when you are backstage, this is the view that you see when you're backstage. And when you are live, this is the view that you see. So the main metric that we give them for knowing if they're live or not is when they see this screen, they know they are live. And I'm going to mute my microphone. When they see this screen, they know they are live. And when they see this screen, or sorry, when they see this screen, they know they're backstage, and when they see this screen, they know they're live. So whatever those looks are that we've established beforehand with the client for, what's the live look. Sometimes it's a program view, or sometimes it's a customized view. But we really hammer that home because, we try to have the ASM count people in or cue them in, say, stand by, Mark, you're about to go live. And you're following the show caller, and show caller says go, and you take them live. The ASM will say go, and you're live, but because of the latency and all the return feeds of all that, they might not hear it. So it's important that the ASM calls the standby, and that the presenters know that when their screen changes, they know they're live. Now, when you're doing rehearsal, and I talked about this a little bit in previous videos, when you're doing a rehearsal, most of the time, everyone just wants to hear everyone for the rehearsal. Like, in show mode, a lot of times that Zoom call, clients want that isolated, like they don't want presenters to hear that Zoom call. Sometimes they do when we're all backstage, like they want everyone to be able to hear everyone, but that's not always the case. But anyway, for rehearsals, really the only thing you want to rehearse with them is when they know they're live, which is just a visual change, a video change, their output. So when I'm rehearsing with people, I will say, I'll just manually change their video source instead of using my Stream Deck, because as you know, in the Stream Deck, the one button triggers like 17,000 actions. So if it's just the video change, I'll do that, or I'll make a special, and I think I showed this in a previous video too, I'll make a special rehearsal button on the Stream Deck that just changes the video input. So, you get your practice in, punching the keys, but it doesn't mess anyone else up. Because in rehearsal, it's just like when they're on stage, they're going to want to click through their PowerPoint, they're going to want to talk to, their internal client team, or whatnot. And so that just kind of makes things easiest. Sometimes I've had rehearsals where, they want to do a true full dress run where, backstage is cut off and we send them live. But if you were to run rehearsal just by pushing the buttons on the Stream Deck and you send them live, like they won't be able to hear backstage. They'll only be able to hear people that are live. Okay, so next we're just going to talk about connection health and some tips and tricks. I've gone over some of these already, but we'll recap here on this. Your caller bandwidth and resolution. So you'll be able to see all of that up here. I'm getting a steady 720 right now. A lot of times you won't get that. Sometimes it'll be 540. That's fine, especially if you're not going full screen with these presenters. A lot of times you're not. If they're in a panel of 4 people, their resolution is not, I dropped down to 540. Their resolution's not going to be that high anyway in the pixel space. So a lot of times, even if it's a low bit rate, I just won't say anything on connection health as long as we stay in the green and we're not super jittery. Your connectivity issues, we've kind of talked about that a little bit too. If they can connect on the most of the time, people are able to connect on the first try, and it's fine. If they are in an office that if they're trying to dial in from their office, if it's a corporate client, and they have their own security and firewall rules, that's a little trickier. In those cases, you'll see people start to get hung up. So I have a one sheet that I send out for our firewall requirements and what ports need to be opened. The way vMix works is that initial website page and the initial server connection, that requires only a couple of ports to be opened. And that's usually fine with companies to manage that to get that minimum required connection of that relay server. It's only a couple ports that needs to be opened. The way vMix works is when it tries to make that peer-to-peer connection, it'll assign a random port from a very wide range of ports. So and usually the IT department, whatever company you're working with, doesn't want to open up that many ports. It's like thousands and thousands of ports that need to be opened. So they're not going to do that. So if I have corporate clients who they're calling in from an office or they're on a VPN like that, it's most likely going to be, a relayed connection, which is fine. You just do a test and make sure that you're able to make that connection. So I'll send over that sheet. I'll probably handle that in pre-production, loop you in on it. So what most commonly happens with that is their IT department actually doesn't open up the right ports or does it incorrectly and they aren't able to connect. So we'll tackle all of those in tech checks. But if people are calling in from home, we try to have them disconnect from the VPN if they are able to connect, to disconnect, or to use a personal device to connect to vMix call. We want to avoid VPNs at all costs and avoid, as much as we can, avoid having to open up ports with people, because it's a relatively simple task, but in a big company, depending on your IT contact, it could be a whole thing. So I always try to make sure that we have an IT person on call and we do a test connection with their IT contact. The next thing is always request that they hardwire their Ethernet into their computer. Sometimes it'll happen, sometimes it doesn't. If they don't, then they don't. But if someone's got a bad connection from their house, that's one of the big reasons why. If you're getting real spotty connection from someone, one thing to try is go, what I showed you earlier in the remote bandwidth is requiring less bandwidth from them. Another big one is to ensure that they have all unnecessary programs or tabs in Chrome closed on their computer. I've done my own tests and I've seen it with other people. If you have like 15 tabs open, then that will really eat through. It'll affect these stats here. It'll affect your bit rate. If someone does have to close out a bunch of programs and you think they should be getting a better connection to them, just have them reconnect, have them refresh the page and wait for a couple minutes to see what happens there. If I'm trying to diagnose some connection issues with someone and I've tried a few things already, I'll just have them reconnect and let it sit for a minute, see what happens. All right, I think that just about does it for this video. Stay tuned for the next entry.